Hello, sweet friends, and welcome to The Way Through. I am your host, Bonnie Worth, and of course, as always, so incredibly grateful to have you joining in on today's conversation. If you are someone who is tuning in for the very first time, welcome, welcome. This show is really looking at what are the blocks and barriers that are getting in the way of us living our best possible life and completely loving the life that we get to live. What are the challenges? What are the ways that our human condition stops or prevents us from moving forward? We take a look at not only the energetic sensitivity that we have through the lens of mediumship, but we also look in terms of what is conscious co creation, as well as unraveling the inherited conditioning and these blocks and barriers that can be holding us back from this life through a metaphysical context. So I'm so glad and of course, so grateful to have you tuning into the show. Over these past several weeks, I've really been laying what is a foundation, so to speak, for the bigger, and say I would say the I would say the bigger what would be purpose of behind the work that I do as a medium, and of course looking at all of the facets of the impact of wounding, of inherited conditioning, of looking at what I consider are the four core wounds of the ego. And over the last couple of shows, a few shows I've been talking about that. One of them, of course, being abandonment or neglect. So if you're tuning in for the first time and haven't caught that show, I encourage you to go back and listen to that. What does abandonment, how does it affect us? The next one is our empathic codependency that begins to play out, and the impact of what that can be. Today's conversation is understanding the many contexts of abuse, the different forms and the variables, especially the impact on our energetic sensitivity and our capacity to really not only know our worthiness, but to really have a functionality within our lives that allows us to be well and to feel well and feel worthy. And of course, moving into the fourth one, which I'm going to be talking about again in a few shows, which has to do with loss. So looking at the four distinct areas, and now these four distinct areas are not only areas that I've been come to be aware of through my own healing from my past, through all of the traumas and experiences of my life, but also in terms of this greater work that I do with other people. These, irregardless of the storylines, the narratives, the experiences that have happened through my time of sitting, and doing work through trauma recovery with individuals, I saw a pattern evolving, a pattern that started to play up, and it all began to come into the very root of what exists within all of us, irregardless of the experiences, the situation, the circumstances involved that are, have impacted or have created this wounding aspect. It all came down to these four areas that when we begin to unravel, they are like a tapestry and a thread. And as we begin to, work through the paradigms, the belief systems, and begin to ignite a greater sense of belief in oneself, a connection to who they are, the authentic expression, as well as the capacity to just move forward in one's life. It's really looking at all of these areas as being fundamental or foundational in what has allowed people to be able to move forward. So it's like we can pull the thread in one area and it just begins to unravel all of the storylines, all of the narratives. And when we look at the root of everything, which really at the root comes down to our own innate worthiness, what we believe that we are worthy and deserving of in our lives. And so when we've been impacted by any kind of trauma, any kind of wounding whatsoever, our worthiness becomes fragmented. So when we look at our healing, work that we've got to do for ourselves, and I say we've got to do it because it's what allows us to come into a greater and fuller expression of who we are, to experience more joy, more ease, have more flow in our lives. It also, for those individuals, if you are someone like me who is in service through your connection to the non physical world, if you are a light worker, a healer, the empaths of the world, this becomes really important for us to be able to find not only our own autonomy, but the capacity to be able to show up and be of service to others with no longer having these blocks and barriers, creating limitation in our capacity to serve or to be of service. So, why am I having these conversations? Well, because it's a big, big piece of what has allowed me to, the healing associated with these areas have been the things that have allowed me to show up to do the work that I feel so passionate and called to do in the world. And it's, of course, my greatest hope and intention that through these conversations and through our time together, that I can help to empower you to really reclaim your sense of autonomy and ignite that worthiness inside of you, so that you can, show up and be within that greater authentic expression of who you truly are. So, looking today at today's topic again, every single one of these conversations that I bring to the table every week really creates more conversation, or are areas that we can dive into even deeper. And so, looking at all of the facets of layers of how this impacts, where it stems from, but more importantly, how is it that we begin to move forward. And even though I can't solve all of the problems in, the time frame that we have on the show, as I said, my greatest hope and intention is something that I share here is going to help and support you in being able to move forward in your life maybe in a new way, in a new approach. And sometimes, I know one of my mentors, said to me many years ago, if something isn't working in our lives, we have to change what we're doing. We have to change what we're doing, because that's really how we move through breaking any cycle, whether that be a cycle of abuse, whether that be a cycle of self-sabotage, a cycle of, almost of unworthiness. Anywhere we're looking, we have to look at invoking what is our personal power. And our personal power is not power over others, but our power of choice, our power to choose and to become much more conscientious and conscious of the impact in terms of not only how the external world has perpetuated, or what has happened to us, but more importantly, what's going on inside of us, to be able to move into that conscious co-creation with the universe and begin to change the conditions of our reality. And that's a big component of these conversations every week. All right, so this one here we're looking at abuse. Now, abuse, of course, can be in many forms, but first to understand that it is a form of inherited conditioning. And it is something that transcends not only our individual experiences, but encompasses direct and indirect influences. Again, from what would be the familial connection, our societal connection. And of course, there's also karmic sources that are a part of this as well. So, on one level, we look at the dynamics of abuse. They're often perpetuated through familial patterns, where one generation may unintentionally model behaviors and even actions that were learned from previous generations. This really creates an environment, or a life, especially within a family unit, where aggression and dysfunction or neglect become normalized. It's just a normal way of living. It's like how I live my life is how my parents lived it. It's how my grandparents, my great grandparents, etc. So it really begins to be passed forward, or information based on belief systems and paradigms, and of course the inherent worthiness or the unworthiness that exists from generation to generation. So it's passed down. It's something that, again, can be, as I said, from a direct or even an indirect experience, and it continues to perpetuate. There's also societal influences here. I think this is really what further complicates or perpetuates the cycles of abuse, these reinforcing the beliefs about power and control and even the worthiness within our relationships. There's also, as I said, the karmic perspective. And this is where we look at the unresolved traumas of past lifetimes that can manifest in patterns and relationships in this current life. So these layers of conditioning really create a complexity to abuse, not only of course, in terms of our own personal experiences, but again the broader context of what it means for inherited beliefs, the roles that are shaped within families, within society, and of course even the journey of our own soul. What are those, what are those patterns? And we begin to look at patterns and themes, and begin to dive into it and come face to face with it, not as a way, to re-experience what had happened, but as a way to feel through it and to move through it and shift so that it's no longer part of what is an impact or limitation within our lives. Now, if you are someone like me, and chances are because you're tuning into my show, is that you are a spiritual empath, you are a medium, you are an extreme energy sensitive, which means that when we look at inherited conditioning, whether stemming from a direct experience in this lifetime or something that has been shaped through familial or societal influences, those karmic patterns, where we look at it, we have there are not only profound emotional impact, but there's also spiritual repercussions that come about with this as well. So the energy of any situation, whether past, present, in whatever context it has, can be absorbed. The emotional states of others, the vibrations of people around us, making us even more particularly susceptible to the residual effects of trauma within our environments. And again, when we look at whether this is a direct experience or we've witnessed something, it doesn't, in fact, it doesn't negate the fact that it's had an impact on us. So not only is there a psychological or emotional impact, there's also an energetic impact that can exasperate the feelings of fear and anxiety, the overwhelm. When we're exposed to abusive dynamics that make not only our own pain more complex in dealing with, but it becomes unprocessed suffering of everyone around us, unprocessed suffering of our ancestors, of the collective wounds that are there, and the weight of this, it really leads to a deep sense of disconnection. It becomes challenging to navigate our own emotions while grappling with the turbulence of energy around us. Now, this was a part of, for me as a kiddo, like this is a big piece of it, which made my healing journey even more complex and challenging, because so much of what I had experienced was not only the things that were direct to me, but were the impacting, energetic, emotional, let's call them even clairvoyant impact of the experiences of what was happening around me. And so, it really began to influence my ability to not only have healthy boundaries in my life, to engage in self care practices, but it really, like many people, when you have lived or experienced any form of abuse in your life, we can very easily, and especially because of being an energy sensitive, we can very easily then become our own abuser in some way. So, we look at not only the impact of the experiences, but then what it means for us in terms of what we understand, or our awareness in terms of what we believe we're truly worthy or deserving of. Now, when we look at abuse, of course, there's many, many forms of this. This can be physical, emotional, financial, spiritual, sexual, psychological. It doesn't matter the extent of abuse, the story behind the experience. Again, it shapes us. It shapes not only our present reality, but it impacts us as individuals. And when we look at not only do we look at what's been inherited and what it is, we are looking to move through, heal, and shift, shift for ourselves, but also looking at this left unattended. That it begins to perpetuate and the cycle continues even in and influences future generations as well. And so when we look at breaking the cycle, this becomes a very conscious and very deliberate act for transformation. This is again where we are consciously choosing to move away from the patterns, the paradigms, the things that have been so ingrained within our conditioning and personal experiences, that we can consciously move through all of the layers in a very thoughtful and a very considerate and compassionate way, so that we can show up. Not only can we break the cycle now, but that we can begin to show up in terms of influencing, or a positive influence, not only in our immediate world now, but of course and affecting what are the generations to come. So, I used to always look at, based on, growing up in some poverty, in growing up in poverty, is to believe that wealth, or money, was going to be the greatest gift that I could ever create for future generations. I always looked at, what I could do so that, future generations, my kids, my grandchildren, great grandchildren, never had to struggle financially. And yet that's so minute of importance, when I understand things now, that the level, the wealth of healing, the wealth of love, the wealth of well-being that can come now as a result of my conscious choice to stop the cycle, to no longer allow for the conditioning to override my ability to, not only show up and be a good human, but to positively influence and affect, other people's lives in a positive way. So we look at, I mean, there's so many aspects of this, but it just becomes this conscious choice to do better. This conscious choice to love ourselves and to love others. This conscious choice to look at saying what's acceptable and not acceptable, and to anoint ourselves as worthy. And once we anoint ourselves as worthy, we're going to disappoint other people. Other people are not necessarily, we've changed the paradigm, we've changed the relationship, but it really comes down to understanding, of this whole, from a spiritual context, this whole understanding that we are divine, and we are worthy, and that we are lovable, and all of these things that maybe our paradigms, beliefs, and conditioning have taught us otherwise, especially if you are someone, a survivor, of abuse in some way. The impact, of course, of what that can be. It's such an important, not only conversation to begin to have with ourselves, but to begin to shift and change the variables that have led us to believe that. And once we begin to unravel everything, we realize that everything we've been carrying and everything we believed about ourselves was never ours anyway. It was influenced in some way, and it was never ultimately the truth of who we are. So, okay, let's look at the impact of abuse. So, this where we look at, it has an effect on the mind, the body, and our spirit. This is, when we look at it from a holistic standpoint, it's not just a aspect of our mental state. It is our mental, emotional, our spiritual, our physical well-being that becomes impacted, and become the variables that of things that we need to, look at overcoming. We can look at it first from the mind, where, it really becomes the battleground, right? We have negative self-talk, we have intrusive thoughts that, begin to take root. And again, these perpetuated narratives that, really kind of keep the abuse alive inside of us, right? So when we've been abused, we then, because as I said, we become our own abusers, and sometimes that's, with our own thoughts. But we look here too, there's the impact of this really becomes the overwhelming sense of fear, the anxiety. I know for myself, we look at hypervigilance, because for myself, being very hypervigilant, really a very alertness was really a coping mechanism. I was never really fully able to relax. I needed to feel secure and safe in my environment. So, it was always scanning, what are the potential threats? Is everything going to be okay? Is something something about to erupt? Walking on eggshells, making sure that I'm doing everything right, quote unquote right, for to ensure that nothing bad is going to happen. So it's a cycle of distress that exists, and so it intertwines mentally, as well as some of the physical experiences that we have inside of ourselves, right? So and physical experiences even within our body. We look ultimately here too, where this leads to, not only is there anxiety and hypervigilance, but there's depression. Depression is the aftermath of abuse. That when we look at the internalized negative messages, the beliefs that were instilled during those episodes, that's what leads to an exasperated feeling of unworthiness. That's where shame and guilt, come from as well, or that pervasive sense of hopelessness. And so it really becomes depression becomes very almost creates a sense of paralysis for us, because it's difficult for us to engage with life or even look to seek help in life, which means we're just further entrenched in our suffering, right? We also look at, the fact that reliving the traumatic experiences, the complexity of PTSD, of that post-traumatic stress disorder. So we look at, things, what are the coping mechanisms here, where we look at the memories, the flashbacks. I think this is a big context for me, was the intrusive memories, or being creating in states of disassociation in moments where it was like I was almost back in the experiences that happened instead of present in my current life. And so we look at least, the variables, and the ways that, you know we numb ourselves out, the emotional numbness. And from an astrological perspective, I mean, my moon is in Aquarius, for um, those who are tuning in and understand the aspects of astrology. But so it's easy for me to detach from my emotions, but I became so detached that it wasn't, just numbed out. It was almost like the emotion, my ability to express emotion became null and void inside of me. And so, for others, and I know even for myself, we look at, where does substance abuse come from? There was a time in my life where I was drinking too much wine. I mean, it just is a part of it. But we look at self-isolation, we look at escapism, all of those things that we try to lead us away from the reoccurrence of those memories, or even the stress that runs through our body. This is the shame of the experiences of what, I know for myself. I was so ashamed of the things that had happened to me. I felt so damaged. And if you've ever heard me, speak before, I've always said, I feel like I had a neon sign across my forehead that just said abuse me, because it just seemed that it didn't matter the circumstance, the relationships, whatever was going on. There was just one form of abuse to another. And so when we look at, not only does this create a disconnection in ourselves, but it also, there's a disconnection in terms of our mind and our body. We become, these demeaning messages, the abusive experiences, just become so internalized, and it begins to manifest in so many ways. Again, yes, that worthlessness, being, I always said that the universe had a great sense of humor. It took someone who had, no sense of self-worth whatsoever, and gave me the last name of worth, so that every single day I could remind myself that I was worthy. When I introduce myself to people, I'm activating and recommitting to the fact of that I'm worthy. And so I think it's, beautiful in how it was orchestrated. But it really, when we've been abused, we believe we're unworthy of love, or we believe we're unworthy of respect or happiness. And so it can be the very thing that deters us from committing to our goals. We just become disengaged with life, right? We just avoid opportunities, and especially avoid opportunities that could lead to healing. And this is, whether that be seeking therapy, whether it be new friendships. I mean, there's just a complete void that begins to take place. I talked about, again, when we look at the self stigmatization of things, where we look at, the self blame, And again, for myself too, as I said, that those feelings of shame over what happened to me, believing that if I had been stronger, there's some way I could have prevented what is happening, that I somehow made this, it's my fault that this happened, that I did something wrong to provoke the experience. So all of those things, I mean, further to create the disconnection, the further to the isolation, only exacerbated the sense of shame that was there. So we look at it, the context of what goes on inside of us. But there's also the physical perspective of this, which means that anything that's happened, there is a cellular memory, that there is not only the memory of the experience, but there's the energetic absorption into the cells of the body, into the microgenetic field around the cells. And that information is what translates to us, not only feeding the mind, but it's encoded in the cells of our body, which means it's influencing not only our behavior, but it begins to influence our health. And so this is probably one of the turning points, even for me in my journey, was because I started to have health issues as a result of the avoidance or the unhealthy coping mechanisms that were in place. And so the emotional toll isn't just in our mind, but there's tangible effects on the body. And so, we look at the stress of things. I mean, yes, it's psychological effects, the triggers, but the release of those stress hormones, the cortisol, the adrenaline, that it's always living life in that fight or flight mode. And those high stress situations, even though we might not have, it's a stress that's going on inside of us, can lead to digestive disorders. So the gut brain connection begins to be in distress. There can be cardiovascular issues that can take place, immune dysfunction, the muscle cell, the muscles. I can't even say the word. We're just going to try. We're just going to go. The muscles, the tensions, the pain in our body, really can, become exasperated as a result. So these stress these stress responses are what's called somatic symptoms. And this is the content that lives in the emotional, or the cellular impact, the energetic impact of the experiences that lives in our body, which again just creates the chronic pain, the fatigue, the unexplained physical ailments. There's no clear medical diagnosis. And again, this is that somatic experience, where the psychological distress manifests in some way, it creates further complication. It's just, I know so many of my clients, and even for myself, going to the doctor and saying, this is how I'm feeling, this is what's going on, and they do, the blood work, they check everything, they're like, oh no, you're fine healthfully, your health is great, there's nothing here, but we can't figure out why we're in the experience of it. And so it has to do with the suppressed impact, the suppressed emotional content, and the energetic content of all of those previous experiences that we've had. On a spiritual level, it distorts our connection to who we are. It distorts our connection to the universe, to other people. It disrupts our relationship with who we are and the fundamental beliefs of our own worthiness. And so this, so many people will come forward, and here again, I used to be one of them that was like, what is my purpose? I feel like I had so much more, but it was just, there was such um, existential turmoil in my life. I couldn't even figure out what that was, right? It was there, but it's that disconnection to the universe, that disconnection from other people, from your higher power, from your guides, your angels, from the unseen world, everything, it disrupts it. It disrupts every relationship. And more importantly, as I said, the relationship to who we are really, really gets fragmented. Our identity gets fragmented. We have no, we go into identity crisis. We don't know who we are. We have conflicting beliefs about our worthiness, about our value, about our abilities, even. And so that can really create difficulty in terms of us pursuing our passions, following, the things that we really feel called to do, where our securities or the belief in inability to have value, which means that we maybe aren't pursuing our dreams. We're not following our ambitions. We are, and it just contributes to a greater sense of emptiness in our life. The loss of agency. I think this is, again, for the big piece of it, where for me, I didn't realize I had a choice. I didn't realize I had the power of choice. I didn't know that it was possible for me to assert my own autonomy over my life, because all of the decision making, all of the things that happened, I believe that it was, those are the cards that were dealt. It was just what I needed to move forward, and I didn't really know, what my role was in the world. So, we look at it, this massive disconnection to who we are, the strained relationships, the um, the alienation of our own self, which again, we look at alienation becomes, as I said, the interwoven aspect where we become to abandon ourselves. We abandon our desires, we abandon our gifts and talents and abilities. We abandoned our self-care, all of those things that really, further, of course, the neglect of ourselves. We might even ignore our intuition, ignore the guidance, simply because we believe that, or this increasing feel of being so estranged from our true essence is disrupted, that there's so much pain as the variable, that we're not able to even, trust ourselves and trust the guidance and trust our intuition as we're moving forward. So it becomes very, very um, you know, um, convoluted, so to speak, in terms of what the impact is. And our spiritual pain, from those internalized messages, lead us to feel and believe that we are inherently flawed. We're inherently unworthy of love, of happiness, of fulfillment. And so it really shapes our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors in very profound ways. And when we have a diminished sense of worthiness, there's a lot of internal conflict that takes place, and a lot of internal conflict that can manifest and perpetuate the shame, perpetuate the guilt, perpetuate self-sabotage, and of course all of those things that just continue to lead to greater feelings of unworthiness and unhappiness in our lives. So, how do we change that? How do we begin to alter and move forwards through not only the aftermath of abuse, and how do we stop the cycles to ensure that generations to come are going to have a different experiences? We're basically changing what is the coding within our DNA, the coding within the energy field of the DNA is to be more precise. And so we're doing that in terms means that we need to be willing to show up and do the good work, to do the deep work, to be willing to face the things that have happened, and not to face the people. This is not about, needing to position yourself and needing to have conversations with your abusers, or being able to have to defend your autonomy to your abuser. That's not it at all. This is about, how do we show up now for ourselves to be able to face the memory, to face the energetic impact, to face the emotion that is suppressed or that we've been holding on to, that's created the disconnect, or creating even the physical illnesses, or disruption within our systems. And so we do that by one, of course, recognizing who we truly are and reestablishing a spiritual connection. I truly believe that when we look at the holistic, mind, body, spirit connection, that we really go about it wrong. And I say wrong, I say that lightly, because there's no right or wrong way based on what your soul is looking to experience in this lifetime. But here again, please go back, listen to the first episode of the show where I talk about the mind, body, spirit connection. Because what I truly believe is that when we nurture our spirit, when we nurture our spiritual self, when we understand who we are at the highest level, the divine spark, the essence of all that we are, and we begin to nurture that through our practices, through our connection to a source or higher power that we can only find through ourself, through our internal world. That when we focus on that, that it becomes easier as a result of feeding our spirit, nurturing the spirit. It becomes easier to nurture the mind with optimism, with hope, with positivity, and it becomes easier as a result for the body to regenerate within the cellular aspect of in healthier ways. So when it's like the body believes whatever the mind is telling it, but what's feeding the mind becomes ultimately the most important. And when we are in connection with our higher self, then our thoughts about our worthiness, what we deserve, the beliefs, according to what is, we could say, a divine understanding of who we are, completely override the egoic impact of our wounding. And so it becomes, how do we begin to reclaim that? Well, one, we need to reestablish a spiritual connection. We need to believe in something. And even if we believe in, in ourself, that is enough to begin to activate what is a connection to something more. And so, how do we do that? Well, of course, we look at, all of these great things, in terms of our self-reflection, how we can identify our negative thought patterns, how we can challenge and those internalized messages where we become basically, it's like this befriending of ourself, where we become an advocate of positivity in our own mind. We begin to override the thoughts that say I'm not worthy, the thoughts that say I only deserve to be abused, or I'm unlovable. We begin to remind ourselves, remind, which means our mind has it at its origin. The mind knows it to be true, but all of the inherited conditioning and all of the things that we've been through have changed the mind's perception of who we are. So we need to remind ourselves of the truth. And so we need to work very consciously at pivoting not just the mindset, but the internalized dialogue and conversations, the narratives that we're having with ourselves, to begin to be the override of things. Here again, the therapeutic support. And I cannot say enough about this. Now, for me, traditional therapy wasn't the avenue for me. And I'm saying working with a therapist is wonderful. And, depending on what your needs are, that talk therapy can be very, very beneficial. For me personally, and of course, in working with all of the women I work with in my clientele, in understanding that it's more than just what is conversation through words. It's no more than just the egoic or human experience that it didn't help me. I just stayed stuck in it. It was like having the conversations over and over again only perpetuated the unworthiness. There was no solution, right? There was no solution. There was a perspective, but there was no solution. And my soul was seeking solution. I was looking for something more, and I was looking for, of course, that connection to something more, that internal self-realization is what I was seeking. And where traditional therapy didn't help me in that way, where working with someone through a healing modality, where there was working with someone who specializes in trauma and spirituality, was really what helped me to be able to process the emotional pain, and reframe not only my self-image, but reframe who I believed, what I believed I was worthy of, and who I truly believed I was. And so instead of being the victim, and I really believed I was a victim and I was powerless, to coming into being within my power, or a form of empowerment. And of course, the consciousness and realization through, through worthiness. It's really what it came down to. So, when we look at the intentionality of it, being able to break the cycle, is through looking at the inherited conditioning, what's been passed down and influencing the cycles of abuse, the cycle of victimhood, and then recognizing myself as worthy. Anointing myself as worthy was a critical step in all of it, because it's what ignited for me what ignited for me that I was deserving of love or undeserving of respect, not an either or, but an and for it. So again, that really is what prompted what was a shift of perspective. And through that deeper work was reestablishing my sense of autonomy in my life, but looking at not only challenging the patterns but being able to change the belief systems, change the paradigms, the overall operating system, and do the deeper work to heal some of the karmic patterns and the inherited conditioning from previous lifetimes that was affecting the quality of life, and of course, um, affecting what was my capacity to thrive, really, right? So internal coaching, that befriending of oneself, as I said, that's an important piece of this. So we look at work, if you are inviting you to work with someone, whether you can do this work, of course, on your own through affirmations and things, but I really encourage you, if you're needing help in any way, please reach out, get in touch with me. Allow me to, the privilege of helping and supporting you to be able to change the relationship with yourself, to change what's going on inside of you so that the external conditions of life begin to change. And that's really, where we hear within the spiritual context, as above, so below, which means, not only or what when we look at that spiritual connection, it's like when we can tap into our source, tap into the higher energies of creation, that it begins to alter and change and shift the reality. What's above is below, and but also an understanding what's inside is what's outside. So if we're if our life, the external world, is disruptive and chaotic, it's an indication that our connection has been disruptive, that we've got chaotic information inside of us, or chaotic mindset, or chaotic energy that's running the show inside of us. And so we need to address that. We need to transform it. We need to look at not only creating an environment that's conducive for our healing and supportive of us, but looking at the things that we can do that are important and vital to our well-being, so that we can support ourselves through our recovery, and sometimes, of course, reaching out and having someone to assist and support through that recovery as well. So when we look at, our journey of healing, I think we're just in all it encompasses, because it encompasses the mental, the emotional, the physical, the spiritual dimensions. There is this interconnectedness that in all of our experiences, and an interconnectedness that is not only between you and I, but through this multi-universe. And so when we look at the cycles of that perpetuate as a result of the experiences we've had in our life, that it requires some effort, it requires some commitment, and the awareness and the acknowledgement and the nurturing of our worthiness. And as we do that, I mean, we never get it done overnight, but as we continue to engage in supportive practices, in supportive communities, when we begin to dedicate and give attention to our deeper healing inside of us, it creates pathways. It creates a pathway that not only liberates for ourselves, a liberation from the past, the bounds of our past traumas and things, but it creates a pathway of healing, but a pathway even for others to heal. And so, when we look at the impact of understanding how interconnected it is, and as we take one step, as we start to move through what's sitting inside of us and alter and shift our beliefs and our paradigms, the energetic, begin to release the impact of the energy that we've absorbed and taken on, we're able to transcend the patterns, of abuse. We're able to emerge with a greater sense of authentic resilience, which, of course, ultimately is what fosters a more compassionate world for all of us. And so we look at what is our responsibility? What is it that I need? And what is it that I can do for me that can further support and express my worthiness? And that becomes a question, that might be a question that you ask yourself from moment to moment or day by day, but bringing yourself into a priority of your life, bringing yourself and knowing what happened mattered, that you matter, and what you're choosing right now in this moment matters too. And I'm so glad that you're choosing to tune in to today's show. If there's been something that I've shared with you, of course, that really resonated or helps or supported you on your journey, please comment, like, share this episode even with a friend who you may feel would really need to hear it. Please consider reaching out, subscribing, of course, through multiple platforms. The show is available, and just your you being here is a part of purpose for me. And so I'm so grateful, as I said at the start of the show, to have the chance to talk through these things with you, to bring these conversations to the table, but not to bring them to the table as a way of re-triggering, but of course in knowing that even where there is some aspect of that, there's opportunity and an invitation for us to do the healing. And so this is, again, every show is about honoring the invitation. And so as I said, I hope something I've shared here today helps you to find your way through whatever may be going on in your life. All right, sweet friends, thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm truly, truly grateful, and I look forward to continuing our conversation next week. Bye for now.